Hi everyone. So we'll talk about Africa. I've recorded videos on some of the other regions, and now it's the turn of Africa. So first thing, Africa has 53,649 selectees. You can see that total, by adding up all of the numbers here. These are all the African countries in the visa bulletin for September. Um, And what we're talking about here, if it's not clear to people, is this is the number of selectees per country that each country has, right? And the selectees include the main applicant and derivatives. So if an applicant, let's say a male applicant has won and is married and has two children, they would be four of the 6,001 number in this particular for Algeria, right? So that's how the numbers are. And in total, there are 132,000 selectees. There was a dramatic drop, as we've already discussed in the previous video, the overview video. There's a dramatic drop in entries, and I think a lot of that drop will have come from Africa, because Africa previously saw the largest number of entries, of any region, and probably had the highest fraud levels throughout the region. Not in every country, but obviously some countries more than others. And the new restriction on the passport restriction was specifically designed to deal with that sort of fraud, where people entered multiple times. That's no longer that easy now, where you have to justify each entry by a real passport number. There are people certainly that entered without a passport. And there is a question mark, as we know, about whether those people will be denied or not at interview. If you're in that position, I suggest you wait and see what happens to other people. So, whether there is a general plan to deny these cases where people have claimed to have an exception, and why they didn't have a passport at the time of entry. But I've had a couple of people who said, well, I didn't have a passport, therefore I had to make something up. Well, sorry, that's not how it's designed to work. If you didn't have a passport, you weren't supposed to enter. I think that that's going to hit a number of these African countries reasonably hard with denials. But as I've said in the previous video, it may be that that they end up not denying cases where people had entered without a passport. I could see that as a possibility. I think that would be a shame, because a lot of people actually followed the instructions, and for people that didn't follow the instructions, didn't feel it applied to them or whatever, frankly, those people should be denied. But you can see that there are millions less entries, so many people observed the rules. And that's why I'm taking the fairly hard line that that not entering the passport for a legitimate reason, which is the majority of the time, should result in a denial. Anyway, so back to the numbers. There's some things I want to point out here. So, excuse me. Firstly, I've worked out, calculated based on an assumption of 1.6 derivatives, or average case derivatives. That means that for every selectee, for every case, there would be 1.6 people on that case. So some people would be married and have kids, some people would be single applicants, etc. Based on previous years, I've taken the 2020 number and used the derivative rate for the 2020 number and used it here. That's given me the count of how many cases there are within the whole number range. I think that there are about 33,500 cases. I could be a few hundred out either way. I could be 1,000 or two out either way. It might be 31,000 or 35,000. It could be in that range, right? But I'm giving an indication that although there's a highest case number of 85,000, there are probably only 33,500 cases approximately, which means that there's about 50,000 case numbers which are holes. And so if you're at case number 2,000, you don't have 2,000 cases in front of you, you have something less than that. And exactly how many less than that will depend on your number range. In Africa, the distribution of the numbers are not going to be the same all the way through, and I'll show you why. And it's to do with some of these countries that get very large numbers of entries in a particular country and then get capped at a certain limit. Now, if we're looking at this year, for example, Algeria and Egypt are both at 6,000, 6,001 and 6,002. Those two countries got capped without a doubt, right? And so once they hit 6,000 selectees, which would have been including derivatives, etc., they obviously decided that 6,000 was enough, but but the last case chosen perhaps took them to 6,001 or 6,002. But once they decided that was going to be the cap on the number of selectees there, they then stopped drawing cases from Algeria, or effectively disqualified the rest of the cases from Algeria after that point. That means the Algerian and Egyptian cases, for example, are going to be concentrated in the lower case number range. And if you're an Egyptian or an Algerian, you probably don't have a very high case number. You're certainly not at the 85,000 range or anything like that. I'd be interested to hear from Algerians and Egyptians if you think you've got a very high case number, how high is it? I wouldn't be at all surprised if we're seeing case numbers of 20, 30, 40,000 as a maximum for those countries. But the high case number for a capped country like that, where it is in the whole range, depends on how many entries there are. If you get a lot of entries, you'll get a lot of winners, so many winners that once they cap that number at 6,000, it might be that the country may cap out, may have all of its winners by a much earlier point. If I go back at some of the older years, you'll see this pretty well. When a country caps out, you'll see a range that goes down like this. So here we're going along, and at around about 13,000 or so, there seems to be a reduction in the number of cases, which continues until the next reduction in number of cases. And that's a sign of capped countries. In this particular year, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different countries that were capped early. And this is 2015 data, I believe. 2015 SEAC data. So that's what you see. You see these the distribution of case numbers it appears like it hits a cliff. It goes down in steps, and we're going to see a distribution similar to that. That may not make sense to many of you at the moment. I have a video and an article that explains what I call the holes theory, and the holes are this blue color, and the number of holes per 100 or the number of holes per 1,000 cases is an important factor that we need to understand, and it's explained by my articles around holes theory. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, please look up on my website or just Google BritSimon holes theory, and you'll get to the right article there. Okay, so anyway, so that's just a bit of an indication of some of these capped countries. Now, Algeria is clearly capped. Egypt is capped. I suspect that some other countries are capped too. In Ghana, for example, although the number is very low compared to Algeria, this is going to be almost entirely single people. For some reason, and I'm sort of smiling when I say this, in Ghana, people seem to be, much more often than not, they're single. In Ghana, they also get denied very often for not being truthful and presenting fraudulent documents, etc. So I think that the two things are somewhat connected. I think the reality is people are married just as often in Ghana as they are in other countries, but for some reason, there's some sort of activity going on that results in many more single people being selected in Ghana than other countries. It's kind of odd. So Ghana then may be an example of a capped country, and there may be some others as well. I should have pointed out Sudan is also capped. 6,001. Who else is capped? Congo, maybe. DRC Congo, maybe capped at 4,500. Cameroon, probably not. It's at a lower level there. It's higher than Ghana, I know that, but I have reason for saying that. Morocco, again, maybe similar in terms of Cameroon, maybe not capped. So you may be a Moroccan with a very high case number. And again, it would be nice to know where this distribution lies, but at the moment we don't know exactly. We don't know exactly what the situation will be. Okay, so that's the distribution of numbers. We know them, therefore, we've got a lot of case numbers. We've got a lot of cases, 33,500 cases is my guess. That's much higher than the number of cases we've had in previous years, apart from in, if you like, at DV 2018, and I'll show you what happened in DV 2018 for Africa. DV 2018 actually got capped at a certain point. You'll see that there's no color except for this sort of beige color apart after that point. What happened in DV 2018 was pretty awful, actually. They made the whole region current at some point and then realized that they'd messed up badly, and they went backwards. It's called retrogression, and they put the cap on numbers at about 39,000 from memory. And so the reality was that although there were 32,000 cases in 2018, they didn't all get an opportunity to get an interview. And it's possible that we see something like that this year as well, because we've got a similar number of cases. The quota for Africa is going to be just under 24,000. Could be a little bit lower than this number I have here, because there's going to be a slight upwards adjustment for South America. Because they've got an additional country. They lost one country, but they've got an additional country this year, and the population of that additional country is higher than the previous country. So the country that dropped out was Guatemala with 17 million inhabitants. The country that came in was Peru with 32 million inhabitants. That increases the size of the region and therefore increases the size of the quota for that region, taking quota away from each of the other regions. That's how it works. So this 24,000 number might be a little bit too high, might reduce by a few hundred, but in any case we only have I rarely see Africa actually filling up the quota, because many reasons, but there seems to be slow processing generally in Africa. Either people are slow to respond, or cases are more complex in some way. For whatever reason, there seems to be delays in Africa more than other regions. And I think it's also to do with the lack of internet access in a lot of the countries, and just some logistical things. But generally speaking, people in Africa as a group, and I'm not singling out any particular company, but people in a country, people in Africa as a group tend to react less quickly to changes and new procedures like the document procedure and that sort of thing, and so they tend to miss out more often. So with that being said, 24,000 visas are available, or just under. 54,000 people, or just under 54,000, are currently selected. The 54,000 number will grow because people will get married and they will have babies, and so that number will be growing over the course of the year. But there will also be a lot of people that aren't able to proceed with their case for whatever reason. They decide not to proceed, either financially, or they've decided that they can't handle a move to America for whatever reason. There'll be people who don't respond. Then there'll be people who send in the DS-260 but fail to send in the documents because they don't have the documents to support their case, let's say. Then there'll be people who send in both those documents and are interviewed, but they get denied at the interview because they don't meet the requirements. There'll be all those sort of things will happen. All those are normal things, right? And so that's why KCC select more people than is necessary. However, in this year it seems to be that we have a lot more people than is necessary, and possibly on the very high side. We also have some countries that are banned by the immigrant. Well, at the moment, everyone's banned by the immigrant ban, but the immigrant ban will either be taken away at the end of December, because Trump, decides not to extend it, or Trump will will lose in the election race, and therefore Biden will remove the immigrant ban or whatever bans are left in January or February. Or there's a possibility that the lawsuit blocks the immigrant ban, and so we're left with simply the travel bans, which is really a Muslim ban that affects some countries. And in that case, that is going to affect some of our winning countries here, right? So we would actually reduce the number of selected people who are able to proceed with their case by the number of people in the banned countries. So which are the countries that are banned? Well, it's Eritrea with 509 selectees, Libya 259, Somalia 217 selectees, Sudan with 6,001, and Tanzania, where's Tanzania, with 184. So those 5 countries I've mentioned are all affected not only by the immigrant ban that all countries are affected by at the moment, but they're also affected by the travel ban. The travel ban, whilst the immigrant ban is being challenged in court and may be removed on August 27th or just after, and also the immigrant ban is due to expire at the end of December 31st, the 5 countries I just listed are also affected by a travel ban, which is sometimes called the Muslim ban, and that ban has been tested through the courts and been found to be constitutional and legal by the Supreme Court. That means that ban isn't going to go away unless Trump loses the election and a new president removes that ban. So there are 7,000 people, I think the number is just over 7,000, 7,100 or so, out of the 53,000 that are currently banned, and only a presidential election lost by Trump would help them. So that reduces the number of selectees, and for the remaining countries that are not banned, gives them a little bit more hope of squeezing in within the 24,000 quota. Okay, so I'm afraid it's a sad way to look at it, but one person's misfortune, for example, these people from Sudan, is somebody else's lucky chance, where a high case number in some other country will do better because of the unlucky situation that Tanzanians and Sudanese find themselves in, thanks to Trump's ignorance. So that's an explanation about that. So I mentioned in the first video that there are all these factors that are coming into play, right? So we've got the pandemic. That's obviously a big deal. The pandemic could affect any of these countries. If numbers increase in some of these countries, we could see embassies closing. That could be a factor. The immigrant ban may be blocked at the end of August. If it is, then that will give us November and December as possible months for interviews, and give us back those lost months, if you like, that improves the number of months that we have to process all the cases. That's an important factor. The travel ban could be removed if Trump loses the election, right? That's a possibility. And the passport rule, as I mentioned earlier, we're not 100% sure right now, as it stands today, whether people who didn't follow the passport rule correctly will be denied without any chance, or whether they will be allowed, forgiven in some way and allowed to proceed. It's not 100% sure, but if they're not allowed to continue, then we could see higher denial rates than we're used to seeing in the process, and we'll also probably see higher non-response rates. So, it could be that this high number of selectees we're seeing might be possible to process the majority of those cases. There is still obviously a very big risk for high case numbers. If you're sitting there with numbers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and above, then you have reason to be concerned. But I can't tell you for 100% certainty of whether you're going to get a chance or not. You're going to have to wait and see. There's just too many factors going on, and too many of them of those factors will affect Africa. If, for example, Trump loses the election, Biden comes in, then there's 7,000 applicants that are currently banned that will, more or less instantly in January, probably find that they're able to proceed with their cases. That will dramatically change the landscape. And if Sudan is allowed to proceed, those 6,000 applicants are all in the lower number ranges. They're going to be going before the high case numbers, right? So, so that's going to dramatically change things. Therefore, it's not possible for us to be precise about predictions right now. We also don't have the exact layout. So when I'm showing you data like the SEAC data here, we won't have this data. We won't know the exact layout of the distribution of the cases until January. In January, we'll get a better idea, but a lot can happen between now and then. And what I would suggest is that you just go into a wait and see mode. You just if you've got a high case number, I know you would love an answer to the question of is my case safe, but I'm not going to tell anyone their case is safe unless it's a very low number. So if you've got case numbers in Africa of 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 something, there really is no need to ask me whether your case number is safe. Those numbers are clearly safe. Ranges that get a little bit more sticky is probably 50,000 and above. And that's a very broad, very broad statement I'm saying there deliberately. I want to give you a broad range and make it clear to you that I'm not being precise about those numbers at all. I'm not saying, for example, that if you've got a case number of 50,001, that your chance has ended. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying that you need to wait and see what happens and see how the time progresses. The other thing that people will ask is whether these countries, Egypt, Algeria, and similar countries that are at the caps, whether they will be held by the 7% number. There is a general rule which applies to every country in every region that no single country can receive more than 7% of the global number of visas, which is about 3,800 visas, that can be issued. So, generally speaking, there's only one country that gets close to threatening that limit in most years, and that's Egypt. The reason for that is that they get a lot of selectees, they get high approval rates, high rates of approval, high rates of response, etc. And the whole thing sort of comes together so that Egypt has a chance of exceeding that 3,800 number of issued visas. Right, the 7% cap is not on the selectee number; it's on the number of visas that can be issued. Right. So other countries typically can't get to that level. In Algeria, for example, we're probably not likely to see Algeria threatening the 7% number because not enough of the cases will respond, not enough of them will be approved, and so on. And there'll be a natural sort of reduction of the number of people going through from the 6,000 number down to something much closer to 3,000, let's say, 3,500. So I don't think that's going to be a problem for most countries apart from Egypt. If you have a high case number in Egypt, bearing in mind that I don't know the highest case numbers in Egypt, but if you have a high case number in Egypt, that could be below the 50,000 number I mentioned, then you could be somewhat at risk as well. And there's a possibility that countries like Algeria and some of the other capped countries might get there. I could be wrong about that. It depends on how things are progressing this year. But but that's a possibility in other countries too. And so you need to sort of bear that in mind. Same thing, for some of these other very large number of selectee countries. Morocco, perhaps. Ghana, probably not, although a lot of those 3,200 people will suddenly get married. Ethiopia, 3,900, that sometimes gets close to the cap. Again, Ethiopians typically, you'll find a lot of cases will suddenly get married or add a child or whatever else. And it could also happen in Cameroon, etc., and DRC. So, there is going to be that derivative growth factor as well in some of these countries that will factor into things. But okay, so I think I've explained everything I wanted to explain. There's country exceptions such as Egypt, where they're going to hit the 7% cap. I've explained why some countries have got massive numbers of selectees, and these numbers are significantly more than we see in a typical year. So, for example, last year, DV2020 numbers, Algeria got 2,700. Egypt still got nearly the 6,000. That's an indication of how many they get. But if you look at the other countries, they're nowhere near. Morocco 2,200. Sudan was pretty big at 3,600. But the other countries other than Egypt got nowhere near the number of selectees that we see this year. That's why it's obvious that we've got many more selectees this year than really is needed. But as I said earlier, there could be good reasons why more cases get denied this year, and there's lots of political and pandemic-related considerations as well that might affect us. So it really is a case of wait and see. A smart person right now would not be making any plans, and would not be banking on their visa until it's in their hands. And a smart person with a high case number would have to sort of adopt an attitude of, I'll just wait and see what happens over the coming months. We'll know more as time goes on. At the end of August, the lawsuit will be hopefully decided. In November 3rd, there'll be the election that will tell us who's going to be in charge in 2021. I hope it's not Trump. But if it's not Trump, that means that there could be a releasing of an extra 7,000 candidates from these groups for countries like Sudan, as I mentioned. So that will be a double-edged sword for Africa as a region. But as I say, we're much better off without Trump, frankly. So that's just the way it will have to be. So we'll have to see how those factors play into the process over the coming months. Okay, so if you have any questions about what I've explained, feel free to ask them below. But I would say that it's easier for me to answer questions on my blog at BritSimonSays.com. So, please pop over there and ask the questions there. Try and read the FAQ before you ask me questions. So I've written many articles over the years that explain some of the basics, things like the holes theory, things like, many things. There's how you resolve errors and omissions on your DS260, how you submit the documents and all these sort of things. They're all over there. There's literally hundreds of documents, hundreds of articles that can help you. So most questions have been asked before. Please check the frequently asked questions before you go and ask your question, which I've answered 1,000 times in the last week. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you do that, you'll be notified when we get any more information. I'll be sending out extra YouTube videos, etc., as well as posting articles on my blog. So keep informed. It's your best option to make sure you're ahead of the game this year. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.